Your Excellency, Governor Holzmann, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, Miss Ambassador of Austria in Bucharest, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Board of the National Bank of Romania, it is with a great pleasure that we welcome all of you at the National Bank of Romania. Today, we have the privilege of hosting Professor Robert Holzmann, Governor of the National Bank of Austria. He is a highly respected economist, professor, and central banker, whose expertise and leadership have shaped the discourse on monetary policy in Europe and beyond. Please allow me to briefly introduce Governor Holzmann. Robert Holzmann was appointed governor of the National Bank of Austria in September 2019, following a well-established career both in prestigious international financial institutions such as International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, and in academia, holding visiting and honorary professorship across the world, from Japan to Chile to Australia, and to Malaysia. Throughout his remarkable career, Professor Holzmann has published 39 books and contributed to other 94. He holds various academic roles, and I would like to mention a few of them. Research Fellow of Center for Economic Studies of the University of Munich and of the Institute of Labor Economics from Bonn. Associate Editor of Economics e-Journal. Member of the Editorial and Advisory Board of the International Journal of Social Security and Workers' Compensation from Australia, and of Editorial Board of Journal of Public Policy, and also of the Scientific Advisory Board of Population Europe. He is also Distinguished Associate of the International Atlantic Economic Council. Ladies and gentlemen, Governor Holzmann's visit comes at a time when central banks around the world continue to navigate complex monetary and financial landscapes. His keynote address, Unconventional Monetary Policy Under Review, Intentions, Results, and Alternatives, will provide us with valuable insights into one of the most critical challenges facing modern central banking: how to adapt our policies to ever-changing economic conditions while maintaining financial stability. The past 2 decades have tested central banks in unprecedented ways, from the global finance crisis to the COVID pandemic and energy crisis, and the inflationary pressures from recent years. Monetary policy has had to evolve beyond traditional tools. The use of unconventional monetary policies, such as quantitative easing, negative interest rates, and forward guidance, has shaped economic recovery and stability, but it has also brought forward new risks and challenges. Governor Holzmann will elaborate on understanding the long-term effects of these measures and exploring viable policy alternatives. These challenges are crucial talks and crucial tasks for policymakers today. For Romania and the National Bank of Romania, these debates are particularly relevant as we continue to strengthen our financial system and align with the European monetary developments. Learning from the experience of the euro area is essential. Questions surrounding the natural interest rates, the effectiveness of monetary policy tools, and the implication for economic growth and financial stability resonate deeply with our own strategic objectives. Now, Governor Holzmann, we are really honored to have you here today. I'm certain that your presentation will enrich our understanding of these processing issues and inspire a fruitful exchange of ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention.
Governor Mukul, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me here for a presentation which mixes a little bit part of my current job being governor, but a little bit still my academic interest in exploring things which, in order to understand them well, I really have to write papers about it and think about it, otherwise it doesn't fit. And when I come to a country, I like to find an audience which understands the topic, is interested into it, because it's a way also for further discussions to come into a better interaction. But I would like to say, before I start my presentation, to give a little bit of my background on Romania there. It goes a long way back. I made the calculation, and it was the first I came to Romania, it was 48 years ago, so a long time ago. At this time I was still assistant professor at the University of Vienna, and was still communist, and we had a conference down here in beautiful city here, Bucharest, but we started out in Brasov, traveled around during communist times, and one of the things which was monetarily related was how different the exchange rates were. The official one, in which you had to change if you came in, or the one you had on the market. The beauty was that we were a university team, we traveled around, some 25 people at the conference, and everything was prepaid, so there was no need to do a mandatory change. So what I did, always interested in market economy, I went in Vienna to the market near the Danube where you could get a much better exchange rate. So compared to the 1-to-1, it was 7-to-1. So I had a big bundle of money for no too much money in order to spend it here. So I know it was forbidden, but it was great there to use it. And this allowed then, to get to know the society a bit better, because you could be very generous in restaurants there, because it was a little price there. And I have to say, I appreciate very much then the hospitality what we had in Brasov, the monastery around that. And when we came to Bucharest, we also went, for example, to the Jewish theater, where I think more people down in the audience than up on the theater day, or the other way around. And afterwards we invited them for dinner. So this was my first part of it. Communist Bucharest with great people, a society a bit suppressed, but you could see it, you could love it. The next time I returned was already in the 1990s, early on, when I came through World Bank and other institutions here in order to help out in the mediator, provide my expertise there for a limited period of time before I moved on to other institutions there. And at this time, it was to see how the changes has taken place and how difficult it is to move from one regime to the next regime, something which I experienced all over here. And so 23 years on, I'm here only for the third time, But I wanted to come here because I got to know so many of my colleagues. I got to estimate them, and they made the promise before I leave my job, I want to come down here, and here I am now. And I hope my discussion, my presentation, my discussion will create some interest in others here to ask good questions and to come forward with their suggestion how to solve some of the issue. What is the big question of this of my presentation? As you know, in Europe, but also in other currency areas, after the 1920s, and only starting before, some claim it was after 2013, we had to engage in unconventional monetary policy. We had to engage something which was the norm. The normal monetary policy before was, let me put simply, very simple. You had essentially one interest rate, and if you wanted to achieve your goal of price stability, if and as the inflation was too high, you increased the interest rate, and if the inflation became too low, you wanted to support the economy, you decreased the interest rate, and then you had perhaps a little bit of minimum reserves, and essentially that. The simple approach became difficult or impossible as we had a fall in what's called the natural interest rate, or the rate which somewhat around which you should gauge your interest rate policy. And this natural rate started to move towards zero or below zero in some of the region like the euro. Well, this was meant then to have different instruments introduced. And these instruments, we'll talk about it, were unconventional. Now, over the last few years, we had inflation again. We're trying now to come down towards the 2%. But at the moment, it's not clear yet whether this natural interest rate has re-increased, as some indications are, or it remains low. If it re-increases, we won't need to do unconventional policy immediately or soon or never perhaps. But if and as this natural interest rate remains low or becomes negative again, we have to do again unconventional monetary policy. So the question is, how has this unconventional monetary policy performed? What did it do? Did it do what was intended? Or did it have side effects which are not unintended? This is a major part of it. And if we say, well, actually, doing it the same thing again may not be wise, then the question is, what are the monetary alternatives? So what can be done, alternative monetary policies which are not unconventional as we know it? Are they promising? Are they working or not? And if this does not work, what is left? Well, with a little bit of inspiration, you can say, well, perhaps, what are the methods in order to increase asta again? What are the possible economic mechanisms which allows us to have the natural interest rate re-increase again? Of course, if I were to talk about everything, I think we have to call the supper in tonight and would return after midnight, so don't worry. I will only give you a select presentation to that. So what I will do about it is, number one is unconventional monetary policy, what was expected, how it should work, what outcome is, and what was did they achieve what they wanted to achieve. The other one is, what are the unwelcome implications which we have, which you typically, unfortunately, don't hear too much out of the official institution, and this includes the ECB. So I'm also licking them in order to also look more carefully from research sides into that. Third part, then what are the alternatives and what are the preliminary conclusions? And I hope in 40 minutes or so I will have finished this part. So, what is unconventional monetary policy? What was its intention? How did it work? And what did not work? There are essentially four instruments which unconventional monetary policy applied. These are deposit facilities, finance facilities, margin lending facilities, and before what we had it, monetary policy and its rates moved between the upper and lower rate and would try to have it. In addition, we had minimum reserve requirements. But if and as we were hitting the lower bound, this couldn't work anymore. So new things had to be invented. And these were these instruments. And it started out with the negative interest rate policy. And from the papers I know among central bankers, there are many here with a PhD, many are professors there. And the older ones will definitely recall if we had gone to an exam and we would have proposed a negative interest rate policy, we would have been thrown out of the exam room immediately. Negative interest rate. What is that? Because with negative interest rate, a number of the traditional models don't work anymore. It has to be positive. It cannot be negative. But still, the question came up, can we go below zero? Originally, no, you can't do it. And said, well, you can do it, but there may be finally a lower bound in which the effects he wants to create turn out in the opposite there. So this is the effective lower bound. We don't know where it is, so one had to explore it. So negative interest rate was the first part which was introduced. Second one, then, in parallel, sometimes before, was to buy assets. The central bank was buying assets on the market. This is nothing new, but with specific purpose. Because if you reduce the interest rate very much and you don't correct the interest rate alongside of it, you get a steep interest rate, but you would like to have a flatter interest rate, so you have to buy on the market so that through the prices of the assets up there, the interest rates come down. So purchasing assets on the market, government bonds, but also private assets there, was another element which was used, and as you will see, this was used to a very, very large extent. The third part of it was then fund for lending. Well, we always had in the past used instruments in which if we had a problem with the cycles that in the cycles which required encouragement of the economy, that interest rates were low, but still they were positive, and then you could go to Minister of Finance said, well, if you take a loan from a private bank, we will subsidize this loan. And this fund for lending was one instrument in which you offered the banks very lowly loans with very low interest rate or even negative interest rate. So you gave her the central bank, the banks a loan, which had a negative interest rate, so you subsidized the loan, and this was intended to pass it on to the enterprises and consumers in order to encourage economic activity. And the last part, which is quite likely the most difficult to understand, but not only for policymakers, but not only for normal people, but also for policymakers, is this forward guidance. And the idea behind forward guidance is, I say something, I claim something, I commit to something, and if my commitment is strong enough, and if I keep it, I can use less instruments in order to have the same effects there. And there's a forward guidance in which you are very clear about what you're doing, Artesian, and the other one is in which one has to interpret what you're doing, and this is then Delphic. And this is also a method which came up conceptually and was implemented. So, these were these 4 instruments there. And if you do economic policy and you apply these instruments, what would be the normal thing to do is, well, you would say, okay, let's see whether they worked or not. And here we will come back to this point, but before that, you see a number of these graphs which shows how much unconventional policy has happened in the past. The first graph is about negative interest rate, policy rates and deposit rates. Deposit rates became the policy rates before they were not the policy rate, it was the middle rate there. And what you can see to the left and the right here, various currency areas moved into negative territories. The Swiss, the highest one, minus 0.75. The euro, minus 0.5. The US kept it at 0 there. And then as the inflation started to grow, you can see going high up and down there to this level there. So we had a real development with very high levels of interest rate and very low levels, even negative interest rate. And what you see here is then on the left-hand side, you see the interest rate policy of the past when you had a corridor system. So you had the middle way and an upper interest rate on which you could borrow marginally, and the upper one where you received on the deposits rates there. But as interest rates become negative, we moved from this corridor system towards a floor system. But we never talked about it. This happened automatically. And now the discussion on monetary policy is, do we want to go back to the former corridor system, or shall we stay in a floor system in which we do off and on also monetary policy? This is one of the things which we discuss within the European monetary system now, and it will occupy us for the next couple of years. On the right-hand side, then you see a balance, and the balance has both sides the same size. And the upper part, what you have there, is the assets of the monetary system. The lower part are the liabilities. And what you have there, compared to a bank, a central bank, money is a liability, which is on the passive side there. But you see how large the amount of money in the balance sheet of the central banks have become. It moved to slightly 1 trillion up to over 8 trillion there. This is the euro part. You have the same thing also in US, coming out from 1 trillion to almost 10 trillion there. And then you have also this refinancing operation, this funds for lending. As you could see, it existed before the crisis, but then we moved it up. We had funds for lending of 2.2 trillion, and we brought it down to 0. So quite some expansion and reduction without any problems. And on the right-hand side, you see the monetary purchase program there, how we are coming down, but we still have a way to go before we return to a balance sheet which we would like to have. So, this was a quick show through to get some of the magnitudes out. So with unconventional monetary policy, we made merely changes which haven't happened in monetary history. That was really something gigantic. And we did it inside. You did your little spiel with your own currency there. We did it as part of a currency system, but the big currency systems, Fed, European Central Bank did it, and you had it also done in the UK. Japan had a special situation there, but other countries like Australia or New Zealand was in a similar situation. So, now, the question then is, if you did it, then the question is, okay, afterwards, to say what was intended and what was achieved, and in the middle, what was not intended and what may have provoked contrary reaction. And what you have there, I won't go through all of the details there, just to give a little gist there. When you say, okay, when you normally reduce an interest rate from within positive territory, say, okay, interest rate gets lower. If the interest rate is lower, this encourages individuals, employers, households to take more loans. This is the normal part of it. Does the same thing work if you make a positive interest rate negative? Well, if you get a subsidy for your loan, well, you would say, I will take the loan. So yes, it looks like there. But there's another element which should have worked is if your interest rate goes low, even negative, then you have a wealth effect. And this wealth effect is up to some extent positive. So you not only borrow more, but your assets, what you have out there, which are with a fixed interest rate, becomes more valuable. So you get another consumption shift there. And but at the moment, this reverses there. So there's a lower bound which you have to respect. But normally we'd say, okay, well, looks like negative interest rate could work until a certain moment where you cannot go lower. We never found the place where it goes lower. We never moved into -1, 1.5 or too much. But the Swiss with 0.75 thought that's a level which could work out. Second thing then is quantitative easing. This was the part of it of tweaking the yield curve, making the yield curve flatter in order to offer through lower yields as the high-end incentives for investment there. So as you could see from the figures from 1 trillion to almost 10 trillion, a lot of money was put on the table in order to tweak the yield curve and to put a lot of money there in order to make this happening there. So, and one of the ideas was always, with in particular in a monetary area like the European monetary area, is different countries have different reactions to the way how money is working there. But if you have enough liquidity, then you can expect a more homogeneous monetary transmission. And this was particularly important as we had countries there like Italy or Greece, where perhaps the money transmission was not so easy. This was the second part. Fund for lending, same thing. If you offer individuals, households, and entrepreneurs a negative interest rate loan, you give them money and you pay for them that they take the money. You hope they take the money, run with it, and then, how to say, create more business, and the inflation rate moves up again. So this was the idea. And forward guidance, again, the idea is I say something, I claim something, what I will do in the future is monetary policy, and I try to do it in a convincing way. And if I do it, I can use less quantitative easing, higher non-negative interest rates in order to proceed. These were the intended positive effects. The question then is, as we know with medicine, every medicine, also a monetary medicine, has negative side effects. So what is the side effects there? We cannot go over and say it was only positive. What was the negative effects there? So again, I won't go through all the details there. And from the negative interest rate, I pick up the ones I'm sure the bankers would have said, negative interest rate, that's bad for our profitability. Yes, sir. And what does it mean? Well, if you're not profitable, we cannot expand our business as much as it did, which is negative for the economy. One other argument is to say, if we offer negative interest rates, then enterprises that should leave the market because they're not profitable should leave it. But we offer them interest rate with a subsidy, negative, well, in this case they can survive. And if enterprises that on the market, that should not be on the market, we call them zombie firms, zombie because they are walking dead, but they don't leave the market. So zombie firms is just something which may be negative. Fund for lending. Did it work? Did they do the money there? Well, the only study I know which looked into it, both empirically but also based on model, was a study done by the Austrian National Bank, in which we looked into that and we found out actually the impact of these funds for lending on lending was actually very small. How to say, it really created very little additional lending there. And additionally, it was quite expensive. For Austria alone, this fund for lending and what we had for a decade, but mostly after 1920s, costed at 1.7 billion euros. It's not the world, but it's still an important amount of money there. So wasn't so good of it. And then, of course, quantitative easing, influencing, trying to influence the yield curve may also do some negative effects there. And one of the effects, what we conjecture and what we have seen is, as the assets, the monetary assets were less valuable, the question is what other things one could buy, in particular if you are not, how to say, a highly rich person, but still have some money, in what could you invest? Property. So there's a lot of liquidity, what we had, contributed that in Germany we call it buying into property gold. So you use the cement gold. And so what we had, there was quite an increase in the values of property for those who had the money, and for those who didn't have it, had to face higher square meter prices in Vienna and in other places there. So this is this part there, and there are many other side effects which are there. So the question is, okay, this was perhaps, in some cases good, in some cases bad. What does the empirical world be doing? So definitely all central banks must be doing now studies in order to estimate it, whether it worked or didn't work. Unfortunately, it's not the case, but for this we can always rely on research. And what had happened is that fortunately researchers have done a lot of papers there, and my staff in a paper published last year or beginning of this year, they looked at the best journals in the world, selected 120 papers, looked into that, and what you have there is the result on the right-hand side. You have these 4 instruments we investigated, and you have quantitative easing, you have forward guidance, negative interest rate, and you have the funds for lending. The reds are the positive result, research with positive results. The size of the ball tells you whether it was a large or a small effect, and the red, the blue one on the left-hand side, are the negative effects there. And you see, as always in the bricks, there's no clear message there. What comes out there, yes, it had some positive effect, it had also negative effects, but this requires more work there in order to be done to better understand it. But it should perhaps entice some of the colleagues here to explore into these areas then. So, Now, what are these less welcoming effects which are conjectured and what we have seen up there, which are not yet up here, which have not been put into the literature there? And the one it is, has this unconventional policy, in particular, the purchase of assets by the central banks, contributed to inflation? Was this an element there? A second part, which is quite visible, is that the central banks are, after moving in from high purchases there at value interest rate, moving towards positive interest rate, it resulted in a mismatch and sustained losses. How large are they? Will they happen in the future? Something to look at. The last part is, if you don't want to have the same thing in the future, in 5 to 10 years down the road, are there alternatives? What can we do? Very quickly to that. The first one is, on the right-hand side, you see the blue line is monetary aggregates, it's M3. And below you see for the euro, which is the harmonized inflation consumption price index there. And what you see there, yes, it goes up underneath there, so there's some correlation there. And as you know, as we do traditionally econometrics there, if you measure the changes in monetary aggregate and the changes in inflation, there's some relationship, sometimes negative. It doesn't work out like that, so it doesn't give it. However, if you're of the opinion, what I am, is that inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. No excessive monetary aggregates, no inflation. Then you have to do something which is different there. I hope you have a question then on this, much it is what you think about. I'm looking forward. Then 2 research papers by Borio, famous person from the BIS, the Bank of Banks in Basel. He came out with 2 studies there in which he used an econometric device in which, I would say, we didn't do it on a yearly basis, but he aggregated the money in decades. And then it came up, and these estimates are there. The coefficient is 1, so money translates not immediately, but it translates in aggregates into a high inflation rate. And the right hand is more recent paper, what he had to say, okay, if we have low inflation and also then lower monetary, low inflation based, there was less monetary aggregates changed. We don't see a real relationship, but if you have higher inflation there, which is going beyond 10%, then you have it. So in low inflation, we don't see this coefficient of 1 or only over time, inflation what it is. So this is quite definitely an ongoing discussion between the believers and not believers, whether monetary aggregates create inflation. My belief it does, and the empirical estimates, some support it, others come up with different stories there. The next part has to do then the impact of unconventional monetary policy on our balance sheet, on our profits and losses. And here on the left-hand side, you have a balance sheet of a central banker. We focus on the part in the middle, where we have on the left-hand side, we bought the assets on the market, and we bought them partially with negative interest rates, which were on our books there. On the right-hand side, as a balance, this has to show up, and this shows up as the deposits of the banking system with the central bank. And what has happened is that, of course, with high inflation, and which emerged afterwards, Our assets, which were typically longer term, are still sitting there with low returns. Whereas on the liability side, suddenly we had a lot of money held by the banking sector. And on this money of the banking sector, we had suddenly to pay 4%. On the asset side, received no interest rates. On the liability side, we had to pay 4%, which is a mismatch, and which is the reason why we had this high level of deficits in recent times there. And I have here not the aggregates over all central banks, it's only the ECB, so not Austria, etc. But I can tell you, last week or 2 weeks ago, we had our press conference on our results, and we had again explained to the public, and my communication officer helped very much to make it well, to explain why we had again a deficit of over 2 billion, aggregated now already more than 4 billion, which is on our balance sheet there. So it's an issue. And if this same kind of policy we had to undertake in the future, what we would have to do, we would have to become again negative. But how long would it take then to become positive? Well, we hope in 2, 3, 4 years we will become positive again. But this means on our expenditure minus revenue, we have accumulated negative carrying forward. And so as next, we first have to use the small benefits then to reduce the deficits, and then we have to pay for the interest rate there, and then we have to again put up our reserves. So in some cases it may take into the 1930s, early 1940s, if no hiccups in the meantime. So this is quite a challenge for central banks now, what to do. So what could happen, and we discussed it at the central bank. I was voted down, but I still continue to insist on it. An instrument, what central bankers have been doing in the past, I know the banking community is not happy with it, but I still insist that it's a valid monetary instrument, is unremunerated reserves of the banking sector with the central bank there. This unremunerated reserve in the past have been 10-15% rate there. So part of it is remunerated and part of it is unremunerated there. And this is an area, and here Baltic Railway speaking about it and others about it. It will come back to the discussion at the European Central Bank, because I don't think I will let it die. So let's move on to the last 5 minutes. The next question then is, okay, you made your point, but what about monetary alternatives? What are monetary policy one could imagine that could be implemented but don't have these negative side effects? I mention only 3. The first one is make-up strategies, is to say, okay, if I erred in one direction for some time, then I try to compensate it in the other directions again. And such a system may work. The problem is, it has never been really tried, and where it was tried, it didn't really work. And the reason is, in order to work, it could conceptually work, you have to have individuals with 100% full rational behavior. And this is not the case. So the result of it, it may be a pay to work, so to say, okay, now we had a low inflation rate, now we're getting out of it. Now, how to say, if inflation rate goes up to 6-7%, we don't mind. We're at the overshooting, because if people believe you, go down. Well, it's a question of belief, but we're central bankers, not a religion. Second part is to have a so-called asymmetric reaction function. So this undershooting and overshooting is part of the prior concept, but even, how to say, more enhanced, but the same restrictions apply. You have to have super rationality for the system potentially to work, but if it doesn't work, inflation may explode. Well, you don't want to have that. The ECB, how to say, tried such a kind of asymmetric reaction function at the time when we still were trying to pop up our inflation rate in 21. But studies have shown that the public never really understood what we meant by it, because communicating such a policy is very difficult. And the last part is, that's a proposal by Olivier Blanchard, whom I like very much as a person, but his proposal I don't like. And it says, okay, currently we have inflation target of 2%. In order to avoid the lower bound, why don't we increase our inflation target to 4%? Because in this case we have much more distance between our target inflation and the zero rate there. So what's the heck, why don't we do it? The figure on the right-hand side shows the difference, how to say, about accumulated inflation there, if you have 2%, 3%, or 4%. It's simply, how to say, it would make inflationary pressure on the individuals much more pronounced, and I think politically we won't have the opportunity, possibility then to keep it in check there. So these are the three proposals I know about which have been proposed. We looked at it, and I don't look that it's a kind of realism there. So, summing up, and then I'm there. I have 4 minutes left there. I won't go through that, but the points I want to highlight is we had a very experimental monetary policy, and we are not over that, because we still live with the consequences there. And the result of it, it's important to look very carefully into understanding, has it worked, what hasn't worked, what could be improved further. At the moment we have at the ECB a review process of our monetary strategy of 2021. But we don't have this kind of research that I initiated, so that's a reason why I always push my colleagues there in the research department to look carefully into that. And the argument behind this, for this reason, it's important that central banks keep their individual research departments to allow, how to say, produce research there which challenges the ECB. If you don't have it, you cannot challenge it. Second part is then to take home is, okay, a star. What about the policies? That's an extra paper you can read. What are the policies one could think about to re-increase a star? Well, in this case, one has to say, what are the drivers of this natural interest rate, of this equilibrium rate? Well, the non-monetary drivers are total factor productivity, so productivity, and demography, so labor supply. So what could be done in order to push both sides? So productivity and demography. Well, on the productivity side, we all hear about the great aspirations of AI, artificial intelligence, could be one way of helping to get this out. And on demography, I just learned today about your demographic problem. We have our demographic problems of what could be done. Well, one way of doing it, technically it worked, but you have to do it cleverly, politically, is increasing the retirement age. Because technically, how to say, it would increase the labor supply there and could, for a number of decades, help it. I had estimates for Austria that showed for the next 30, 40 years it would make a major contribution to Astar if the things were linearly there. And there's something new now, research as we speak, has to do, when we look at the most recent estimates of Astar, this natural interest rate, what we see there is that since 2022, it looked like that we emerged. There's a reemergence there. Is this now traditional, or is this something which may continue there? A whole long discussion about it, but it looked like that we had these changes in Astar historical in the past, coming up, going down again, and this was created by by monetary effects, not by non-monetary effects like total factor productivity and population. And the monetary effects, and just to give you a hint to that, is the decrease most recently, which was very strong, may have been triggered by a world in which they wanted to have a safe asset. At this time it was the dollar asset, treasury asset there. And as everybody wanted to have it, how to say, the rate, the convenience rate there was reduced, and this contributed, compared to otherwise much higher rates, to the fall in Astar. So this is a contributor there. What we have now, we have from an excess demand for safe asset, we have an excess supply of government bonds, too many deficits in your country, in my country. So perhaps this creates then that the long side of the interest rate curve is going up again, and this may create over the next couple, perhaps of decades, again a higher Astar there. But this is the future to tell and the future to see, and how to say, thank you for coming on this trip. You may, the airplane has landed. Please, you can buckle up. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. Thank you. So now I'm looking forward to the questions, comments there. Yes, please. Micro, yes.
Hello, from Zero Financiar, Sorin Păslaru. Between that four components of unconventional monetary policy, where do you put the direct intervention of central banks to capitalize private banks, like Tarplane, or, for example, in Netherlands, was in a weekend, they put 20 billion, Central Bank of Netherlands, they put 20 billion euro to save ING banks, to improve, you know, very well. So this kind of direct intervention to save private banks, what you put? It's extra or fund for lending or, thank you.
Okay, thanks. No, good question. I don't think it will fall under these monetary policies, because the idea there is not, how to say, to influence the effects and the low Astar. There, this has to do with monetary stability, financial stability. The idea there is you save a bank because you are afraid that the whole system goes down. You don't save a bank in order to change something around the natural interest rate. So I think it's the second part, what central banks have to do. The first part is monetary policy, stabilizing the inflation rate. The second part of monetary policy nowadays is what central banks, not monetary policy, is to stabilize financial markets there. This is something which always existed, but nowadays it is much more, how to say, open than otherwise. So my simple answer. I see.
May I?
Okay.
Just a follow-up question regarding the unconventional monetary policy interaction with unconventional macroprudential policy. Do you see a trade-off between these two, or a spillover, or what do you think about the interaction of?
Well, conventional monetary policy is interest rate, and if you work in negative interest rate, it is unconventional. If you work in positive territory, it is conventional there. So what you try, unconventional policy is there if and as you do something which you have to do is because ASTA is low. And so if you don't have a low ASTA, then you don't have unconventional monetary policy of conventional policy. So there may be areas of overlap at the border, but normally, how to say, there are different cases there because you're working in a different environment. Would be my answer there. Now, here and then, how to say, we have also taken the latest. And the lady in this beautiful green. Thank you.
Yeah, Governor. You also mentioned in your presentation, and this is an issue which concerns the Romanian central bank as well, is what about the loss of credibility of central banks if there are recurrent losses, okay, on their balance sheets when there is such a dramatic, although one could argue that the whole financial system could be in such a tailspin. Just look at what happened in the States with the Silicon Valley Bank. And Paul de Grove suggested, and other economists suggested, that there should be non-remunerated minimum requirements. What about, what does a central bank do? A central bank provides a common. The land of last resort is a public good. A central bank is concerned with financial stability. If this is the case and provides a public service, why should it be free? In my view, commercial banks should pay a fee. If they create like a fund, an insurance fund, as it does happen with it's insurance companies and so on and so on, that's not open-ended. Whereas in the case of a central bank, that's open-ended. The central bank can always intervene and rescue the financial system. So I think it is sensible to consider such a proposal. Commercial banks will voice their, but they were rescued when Mr. Peslaru, and to the tune of hundreds of billions, and it may happen again in the years to come. And the second question is, when you said, to do something about contemplating how to raise the natural interest rate, it cannot be done just by policies, in my view, in my humble views. The natural interest rate dynamics are related to profound changes, structural changes in the economy. It may be, and this is, I think Blanchard was against Charles Goodhart. Charles Goodhart said, in the years to come, we may experience trends in the global economy which may raise the natural interest rate. And Blanchard said, no, I think it will get back. And you also suggested it may get back again to very low interest rate. What could happen now is because of the need for more defense expenditure to combat climate change, although the current American administration is very much against such. They think it's bullshit. But you may need more investment, and if we are going to spend more, we may see the interest rate, the natural interest rate, going upwards.
Okay, well, thanks a lot for two relevant questions. I start with the second one. I think Blanchard, he's how to say, a very outspoken Keynesian, who believes very much in her governments can never make not enough debt in order to, how to say, overcome economic issues there. So spending. It's great, and you love to have this low interest rate environment. And they said actually now, before the crisis, actually we're now in a world in which we can essentially take public debt in unlimited manner. This is not my world, because you always need, how to say, a price, an intertemporal price of money. If you don't have it, then how the decisions don't become rational anymore. So in my economic understanding, you need to have a positive interest rate in order to make rational decisions there. On the first question, yes, I mean, private banks have been rescued and will in the future be rescued. In order to limit the rescuing all the world over, particularly in Europe, we set up this financial market regulatory institutions in order to reduce the probability this will happen, but still there will be a part of it. And my understanding is banks have been asked to put money on the table for prior savings there, and adjusted the situation in Austria as we have it, where the banks to some additional taxes they already have in order to support the budget. This has been increased by 1 billion, could be more there. And as a result of it, how much they could contribute, it's part of a political process, but as a principle, it has happened. But this triggers in me an additional answer, which may be, how to say, implied by yours. When we have to look at the fisc, or so the treasury, and the central bank, in principle, economically, as a unity. For governance reasons, they're separated, so that the government doesn't immediately is in charge of money creation when they need it, because otherwise we had the series what has happened in the past before we had own central banks. And if you use this approach, then what has happened is that during the period of unconventional monetary policy, the interest rate has decreased substantially, which has allowed governments to pay much less for public debt than otherwise. So compared to that, the negative balance sheet, what we currently have, which doesn't allow us to pay our normal contribution to the budget, is still small. And the studies, or the estimates from my team until this month, was that one calculation showed that the government saved 51 billion of euros, Austrian government, of low interest rate. And now we have a deficit of minus 4 point something, will come up to 15, 16, and then we'll bring it down. So the government for the next 20 years won't get a single penny from the government, nothing on seigniorage and other part of it. But overall, the budget has still profited. You only have to take it in a longer consideration, not only on a single one, because fisc and the central bank is conceptually a unity, but separated for good reasons.
Hello, Governor Andratimo from Bloomberg. I have a question regarding what's going on in the world right now. The world is on the verge of a tariff war. And I wanted to ask you if you think the central banks are equipped to handle the risk. Because you mentioned that this might trigger inflation. Other economists only see that this war will trigger recession. And if you think that there will be need for central banks to use unconventional measures to handle the potential risk stemming from this trade war and the uncertainties that are in the world right now? Thank you.
Thanks. There's a lot of echo in it, and with age, the noiser information part is difficult to extract. I didn't get the direct question. It has nothing to do with your question. It has to do with the echo in here. I could hardly hear it. What? Come up here. Come up here. Come up. Yes, please do so.
I can do it like this.
Straight in front of it, you know.
So the question
come
is.
Closer here. The echo is still otherwise around. Yeah. Please don't. So, I won't bite. Don't promise.
Yeah, the question is if you think that the fact that the world is on the verge of a trade war right now, you said this is one of the reasons why you argue for a pause in interest rates. If you think that the central banks are equipped to handle these risks that are coming from this trade war, or if you think that along the line there will be need for unconventional measures.
Okay, thanks for the pertinent question. Well, the thing is, sir, sometimes we believe, but we aren't. We are not the master of the universe. So we are not responsible for taking care of everything. We are a central banker. Our main job is inflation. Our other job is to make sure that the financial system works. And so with our policies, we cannot become responsible for things which happen, in the real economy with the trade war there. So definitely what we will do is we have typically clever economists, and they will help us in order to frame answers to this question there. And at times we may do something which we wouldn't like to do, but we'll see. I hope it won't happen. But we won't be the master of the universe. We won't be there to save us there. We're only part of something which hopefully will be done with a bit more economic understanding. But if and as we were to enter a trade war with everything is involved, we have to behave and set the interest rate accordingly. There may be a need for unconventional policy if needed, and we have nothing else, we will do it. But we'll do it, hopefully, better equipped than nowadays. So, my simple answer. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your questions. And looking forward, if you have any questions, send me an email. Happy to answer it. Okay, thank you much.